Okay, we're doing the Rambam in the laws of Talmud Torah, laws which pertain to one's obligation to study Torah, or to disseminate Torah. So the Rambam in the first halacha writes, Noshim v'avodim ketanim, women, Canaanite slaves, and minors, P'tur miTalmud Torah, they're exempt. A woman has no obligation to study Torah. A Canaanite slave, which is not a full Jew, he's bound to the obligation of a woman. And as a woman is not obligated to study Torah, the Canaanite slave is not obligated. And a minor is not obligated in any mitzvah. If a minor violates Shabbos, there's no liability to the minor. Minor eats not kosher, no liability. Because a minor, until one reaches the age of 13 as a boy or 12 as a girl, there's no culpability. However, a child of a koton aviv chayv lamdo Torah, but a minor, a male minor, not a girl, a boy, his father has an obligation to teach him Torah. And it's based on the verse which we say in the second paragraph of the Shema, Shenemar, as it states in Shema, V'limartem osem es b'nechem l'daber bom. You should teach the Torah to your sons, to l'daber bom, to speak in them, meaning to be fluent, to be proficient in them. So it's not just teach him how to read. That the child himself is taught well enough by the father that the child has a grasp based on his age of what was taught to him. As it says in the Shema, teach your sons l'daber bam, to speak in them, that they're proficient, that have a level of proficient, that can actually communicate what they had studied. What about a mother? Does a woman have an obligation to teach her child, a son? A father has an obligation to teach his son. A woman has no obligation. Why? Because only the one who's obligated to study, chayiv l'lamed, is that person obligated to teach. And since we say women are exempt from studying, as a result of that, they have no obligation to teach. So the father who has an obligation to study, he has an obligation to teach his son. The woman who has no obligation to teach, to study, she has no obligation to teach. This is the words of the Rambam. So I asked the question, when you study the laws of Shabbos, the Rambam doesn't tell me that a minor is exempt from observing the Shabbos. Or when it comes to the laws of kashrus, dietary laws, a minor has no obligation to observe dietary laws. It's understood. A minor has no level of liability. A minor is considered halakhically incompetent. And because of that level of incompetency, the child has no obligation. So regarding every other law in the Torah, the Rambam doesn't write a minor is exempt. But yet, when it comes to the study of Torah, the Rambam has to single out the minor, that in this instance he's exempt. So the reason is, as we said, because as regarding any other part of Torah, because he's incompetent, halachically incompetent. He has no liability, therefore he's not obligated. So if the Rambam singles it out here, why doesn't he say the same thing all over? And if he doesn't say it anywhere, why does he say it within the context of the study of Torah? That's the question, always bothered me. So you could say very often when we make a statement, and the statement contains a number of classifications of people, the minor is included in that statement. Noshim, women. Normally a woman is obligated, no different than a man. There are only certain instances where a woman is absolved. So the Rambam is telling a woman is absolved from studying Torah. A Canaanite slave who has the same status of woman is exempt. Because the basis for his obligation is based on the Torah compares the Canaanite slave to the woman in terms of obligation. But when I speak about the woman, the slave, I add the minor, but it's not necessary. It's only because phraseology-wise, the phrase goes together. Women, slaves, children. But even if he would have omitted children, I would know, because it's no different than any other aspect of the Torah, that a minor is exempt. Because a minor is considered incompetent, and therefore a minor has no liability. That's the simple or very superficial response to the question. Now, the other approach would be, no, there's something unique about Talmud Torah which doesn't apply to any other mitzvah of the Torah. I'll give you an example. When does a child become obligated? At the age of 13. So when he crosses that line from 12 to 13, it goes into the 13th year, immediately he has obligation. If he had never studied in his life, you tell me, how's he supposed to meet the challenges if he's totally ignorant? He has no obligation to study. So I would say, observing the Shabbos does not have to observe the Shabbos. He's incompetent. Kashrus, he's incompetent. But what about he studied the laws well as a minor? And he's fully proficient in those laws. And now when he crosses that line from minorhood to adulthood, now he's ready. He's all geared up to take off, because he's proficient in all his obligations. So there's something unique about Torah which has no relevance to anything else. Observance of anything else doesn't have to observe, because he's not obligated. He's not a person of obligation. But the study of Torah, which is the basis to be able to function as an adult, and entering in adulthood is a natural transition. When you reach the age of 13, if he hadn't studied as a minor, you know something? He automatically is going to end up violating the Torah. So therefore, he should be obligated. So why is he not obligated? You know what the answer is? Because the father assumes that responsibility, that the father teaches the child. So the basis for the child to become proficient and knowledgeable, and what he's supposed to be knowledgeable is, that's incumbent upon the father to teach the child. So we're going to see later, what happens if the child has no father? Or the parent was delinquent in the parent's responsibility, and the father didn't teach the child. Does the child have an obligation to study Torah on his own, even as a minor? A Torah obligation. We're going to see the Rambam writes that for whatever reason a parent did not teach a child, when the child becomes of a level of awareness, intellectual maturity, that he's able to process this information, he's obligated to study himself, although he's still a minor. So the question we asked, why is study of Torah, what's unique about that regarding any other obligation? The answer is that, as we just explained. Because without the knowledge, when you become an adult, ultimately, you're going to fail. But you become a person of obligation. Therefore, even though as a minor, normally you're exempt, this would be the exception, because this is the basis for all your function and behavior as a Jew at the age of 13. Now, there's another aspect. It says a father has an obligation to teach his son. What happens if the son has no interest? Does the father have the obligation to interest the son in the study of Torah? Well, since the son, we're going to see yes. What about if you're teaching, you have a Torah obligation to teach another person's son? A person who's a Torah scholar has information to disseminate and teach, you have an obligation. What happens if that other person is not interested? He's not interested in being mentored. He has no receptivity to be involved in the process, to become more knowledgeable. We'll see in a moment, you have an obligation to teach that person. Okay? He says, "Kashem shchayv odom l'lamed is beno." Just as a person has an obligation to teach his son, kachu chayiv lamed es ben beno. You have to teach your grandson. Important. There's a Torah obligation to teach your son. You have Torah obligation to teach your grandson. Why? Shenemar vodatom levonecho ulevnei vonecho. You must inform the Torah to your sons and the sons of your son. It's not only your child and your grandchild. Ela mitzvah al kol chochem v'chochem Yisrael. There's an obligation of every chochem Yisrael, every person who's knowledgeable in Torah, lelamed es kol talmidim, to teach all students, even though they're not your children. It's not only a mitzvah to teach your child to become your student, but even a stranger's child, you have an obligation to teach him. If you have what to teach, you have to part that to a Jew. I had difficulty. It says, not only do you have to teach your child and your grandchild, you have to teach a third party. Rambam doesn't say that. He says, Chav lamed es hatalmidim. You have to teach the students. When does a person become a student? After you study, become a student. So what does it mean, Chav lamed es hatalmidim? You have to teach the students. So the way I understood it was that if a child is interested in being a student, then you have an obligation to teach that child, although it's not your son. What about if it's your son? Doesn't mention anything about you have to see special value in the son. Being your son, you have to teach him. You have to impart the Torah to him. A third, Chav lamed es hatalmidim. If you're willing to be a Talmud, I have an obligation to offer you the Torah. But you're not interested in being a Talmud. I'd have to convince you to be a Talmud. That's not my obligation. But if he is interested, then you have to deliver. Then you have to disseminate it to that person who asks because he wants to be the Talmud. Shenemar, ushinamtem livonecho. This we say the first portion of the Shema. You should teach it to your sons. We learned from being ordained at Sinai. Vonecho edu tamidecho. When it says your sons in the first paragraph of the Shema, that means your students. Shetalmidim kurim bonim. Students are called your children. Shenemar v'yitzu b'nei anavim. The sons of the Nevi'im went out, and these sons of the Nevi'im they were the students of the prophet. So you have an obligation to teach your son, your grandson, even the third party son. So if that's the case, what does Torah talk about? The son, the grandson, and the third party. Say you have the obligation to teach Torah. On that he says, what the Torah tells us, lahagdim b'no levem b'no. Person only has an hour available to give. Who has that hour? Exclusive. The son or the grandson. You have to create a peaceful setting between them that the son has the first priority, the grandson has the second priority, and the third party has the third priority. Yeah. Your son takes priority over your grandson, and your grandson takes priority over the third party son. That's all it is. You have the obligation to teach all of them. However, if you have a little amount of time, your son has first priority, your grandson has second priority, and the third party has third priority. Okay, I think we're going to stop here. We can do this for half an hour right now. Ron?